escape because they weren't doing lockdowns. Then when it turned out that that wasn't true and they basically did the exact same as New York, which was one of the harshest lockdowns, you'll say, whatever, it doesn't matter because of variables.
No, it's hard to talk about this because you don't care
evidence.
much. So, like, if I say, for example, like a couple 100,000 more people died, you don't really care that much because I can't really show you a video. Yeah, you do, because you'll probably go on a rampage about like subways in New York being dangerous. And then if I tell you like numbers about 1 million people dying from COVID, you won't care because it's not something that's a big bang because you react to more feelings and emotions.
That's not true at all.
It is true. It is true. Do you think New York subways are dangerous?
Sure. And
okay, and that's a dumbass opinion. But I want to make you feel safe, so we have to talk about it in a way that sounds better.
Thousands of hours that I've streamed on here, how many seconds do you think I've devoted to New York subways?
All of them.
How about none? Now, once more, you prove that you're an unserious person. The point that I'm trying to make is, before you have radical policies that infringe on people's rights, you have to think through and answer significant questions, such as, is this policy the best policy forward? How many lives will be affected if we don't do this policy? How many lives will be saved by this policy? Are there other possibilities you could have? How many lives will be harmed and in what ways by doing this policy? And when does the government have the right to restrict people's rights, economy, etc., based on sort of how big of a threat they think? Like, for me, did you favor the Patriot Act?
I wasn't alive.
No, you were. You're 25, right?
Well, right now I'm really against them doing mass surveillance to scan faces to find which immigrants are anti-Israel.
Okay, so you would say that you were against the Patriot Act as you now understand it.
I'm with the abuse of the Patriot Act for sure. A minor version of it, maybe.
Okay, so what version? The 9/11 occurs, there's terrorist attacks. Basically, the Patriot Act, the big part of it that I think we'd both be talking about is violating people's Fourth Amendment rights to privacy. Like, they were doing shit like going into mosques that never did anything wrong. And we're like, hey, well, Islam's scary, right? That shit's grotesque, in my opinion. I said so at the time, right? Obviously, you're younger than me, so I'm not asking you to have said it at that time. But the rationale for the Patriot Act was this really scary shit happened. It affected thousands of people and changed our way of life. And we're afraid that a more significant attack will occur, so therefore we're taking away your rights. And the correct response to that's like, well, wait a minute. There are significant questions to ask. When does the government have the right to take away the rights that are enshrined to us in the Bill of Rights? What is that? Why are they doing this? What is the data they're looking at? I'm not saying they have to get it, well, exactly 17,000 people will die next year of terror, but they have to give us some idea of what they think will happen if they don't do it. They have to give us some idea of what the harms will be if they do this. Under COVID, all of that was skewed by people that said, what do you want grandma to die? And you're in Pennsylvania, and so you know that Tom Wolfe told us that small businesses had to die because they were non-essential businesses. Meanwhile, he violated his own orders to go march with Black Lives Matter. He said if you had a problem with it, you wanted grandma to die, while simultaneously he ordered nursing homes to accept COVID patients, so grandma died because her new neighbor had COVID. And you supported the idea of
Wait, so how long did the lockdowns last? When did the final lockdown end in Pennsylvania?
My guess is that it went into late 2021, early 2022.
I'm seeing that the stay-at-home order was lifted in June 4th, 2020.
It wasn't just a stay-at-home order, right? They had this yellow, red, green. Yes, the stay-at-home order was the most significant of it.
When were we transitioned to green then?
What a great question. When did we? Well, it was on a county-by-county level.
First PA, let's see. First PA counties went green, May 22nd. All other counties, let me see. All other counties moved to that phase by June.
I'm reading June 28th was maybe the last green.
So a 3 or 4 month period.
Yeah, what do you think shutting down the state economy for 3 or 4 months did?
Well, that was not the key feature of COVID at all when it comes to shutting down small businesses. It was more of an access to the loans and corruption of the loans for bigger companies that could abuse them. When it comes to small businesses, let me see that. Let me see closure rate.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The big government policies that you would favor, control economy, where we had the government say that embrace the lockdown strategy that you suggest and then give out these loans to pick winners and losers. It turns out that was abused. That's true. One of the biggest socialist policies in the history of our country led to rampant abuse and led to the devastation of small businesses.
That's not socialism. That's very basic neoliberalism. That's very centrist. Or even
well, it's certainly okay. It's not socialism in the effect that full-scale socialism would be government owning the means of production, but it's certainly closer. This is as silly of an argument as saying, well, the Scandinavian countries aren't socialist. They're
I'm trying to see the actual closure rate for businesses, because the closure rate for 2021 was from 2021 to 2022. The closure rate was higher than it was from 2020 to 2021. So the closure rate happened after COVID, during the economic concerns after COVID and the global inflation. So it doesn't seem to be a direct result of the lockdowns. Let me see. What's this?
Also, we're not talking about 3 or 4 months, right? Like, some of the restrictions for COVID started in like March of 2020 in Pennsylvania. So them being fully, the last county going green in June 2021, that's like over a year, right? That's a significant amount of time.
We're looking at, for a small business, it would be, your revenue coming in, what programs are there for support, and then what led to your issues reopening. It seems that the rising costs and shipping ports and supply chains mattered more than the shutdowns.
Why why did supply chains have such a problem? Because we shut down not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy.
And even with shutdowns, we still had the ICU numbers that we had. So if we had no shutdowns at all, the numbers
Give me the ICU
presented.
numbers. What's the average? So we're talking about
like I said, we can come forward, and right now I'm not used to talking to propagandists and people that care about political messaging.
There's nothing to do with propaganda.
Give me a little bit here, because no, for this conversation, you should want both of us to be prepared to have an honest conversation. I already said that I'd want to look up more exact numbers. I brought the ICU numbers and the increase in deaths. If you want to keep on rambling on, you can, but we could get back to tariffs to talk about a more modern topic. I already think that when you talk about like certain buzzwords, conservatives get really emotional and start screaming. So I hope you can prove me wrong here. We can go back to tariffs. If we want to have a conversation about lockdowns, we can definitely relitigate that. But I haven't looked that up since like 2022. I haven't done my YouTube since 2021, so I'd have to go back to my other debates back then and see what the arguments were back then. So I mean, we could talk about it sometime. But you're asking me for some pretty deep statistics right now for a topic I don't really talk about that much.
So you call me a propagandist. You're the one who's calling me names. I don't think that I've raised my voice. You're the one who's being unserious saying, yeah, video games and things like that. Showing that you yourself are the person that's engaging propaganda. I think that it would be incumbent on a person that is intentionally wishing to violate people's rights and to shut down the economy, that they should have to say, why am I doing that? What is the data that I'm looking at that suggests that's something we should do? And certainly post-talk should be interested in, oh my God, I just engaged in a policy that led to, or favored a policy that led to so much economic destruction, led to the destruction of children's education,
was disrupted led to the destruction because it was a terrible
of people's
disease.
mental health.
Other countries went through this too, Other countries had similar issues with lockdowns or without lockdowns.
I understand the need to interrupt here, and I would want to do that too if I was advocating.
Yeah, and now you're putting the conversation in narrative right now. That's why that's why I'm saying you're propagandizing.
I would do that as well if I was advocating.
Yeah, okay, you're propagandizing again. You're putting us in a narrative. Okay.
Again,
now we can go back to the actual stats globally too.
I'm not going to let you filibuster the point because you know that you're making an indefensible point. You're interrupting is what you're doing.
Well, you're saying global supply chains are because of Pennsylvania small businesses closing for 3 months.
I'm going to finish my point come hell or high water. I sit here patiently and let you talk, even when you're attacking me and being unserious. You'll give me the same courtesy. So you can't defend the point, and what you're doing is you advocated for this authoritarian policy. You can't give us the reason why you advocated for it at the time, other than to say a lot of people were dying. And now you're like, well, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Now you're saying, well, I don't really know any of the data or the numbers. I never bothered to look into it.
I do know the numbers, but for you, I need to walk
you through. I
need to walk you through it. I know that I gave you the ICU numbers for the amount of people that died that were non-ICU patients.
That has nothing to do with the ICU.
Non-COVID patients. I mean, non-COVID patients going to ICU because they were overwhelmed. And the refrigeration
what does that have
to
do with
cities,
what we're talking about?
Because of the overwhelmed hospital systems. That's literally the exact thing we're talking about is the hospital systems being overwhelmed. That's literally the exact argument I'm making. And globally, we saw these issues globally. The global supply chains were not because of Pennsylvania businesses closing for 3 months. I agree it sucks, but sometimes as an adult you go through shit. You have to do things that you don't like to come out better. You can disagree with the governmental policies for sure, but even the red states had shutdowns. They still violated rights. So do you think it was still justified when those red states did?
No.
Okay,
That's
then
the difference
you'd be a
between
radical
you.
on
I'm
this.
not.
Yeah, you are a
Right, that's the
radical. Yeah,
difference between-
you're more radical than
it has
Ron
nothing to do
DeSantis
with- it
and
has
Donald
nothing to
Trump.
do with-
Yeah, you are.
it has
You are
nothing
more
to do
radical
with-
than
It
them.
has
Yeah.
nothing to do with radical. What it
disagree with
has to
them.
do with that I'm a principled person and you're not.
No,
You're
you are.
unserious
You're
about
Sunday.
this,
You're
please.
Monday morning
I get-
quarterbacking it.
I'm not Monday morning quarterback.
You-
I have
you-
videos at the
that's the
time that we're
definition of this.
talking. I have videos at the time that we're talking about this. I said that if the government said that something like these lockdowns were necessary, then there were certain questions at the very minimum that they had to answer. For example, they should have to answer how bad do they think COVID will get? How many people will die? How many people do they think will get ill, et cetera, et cetera. Second, they should have to answer questions such as when does the government have the right, at what threshold do they think a problem could be before they could blatantly violate our
Were there
First
any
and
court
Fourth Amendment
cases?
rights and things like that. Third, I said
First?
they should have to articulate what
When
they
were-
think the
no, no,
potential
were there any
negative
court
impacts
cases
of the
about this?
policies. But why are you interrupting me?
I
don't understand.
cases on this because you said
What-
this already.
why are
Were there
you
any
interrupting
Were
me?
there any court cases on lockdowns?
You could ask that question when I finish my point. I find the constant interruptions to be someone who's coming from a weak position because they know that they have to try to interrupt a person because if they're allowed to get their thoughts
Well,
out,
I just
that
want,
you
like,
won't be able to
actual facts
defend
about
it. So
this.
you could ask me after this if there were court cases. I'm going to finish my point. So third, they should have to ask what the negative repercussions of that should be. Fourth, they should have to answer if there's any alternative repercussions. Instead, what we got was a censorship of comments largely surrounding COVID, and we got people just shaming you, saying things like, what do you want grandma to die?
Well, you were
Right.
offended.
Meanwhile, the very
I know
people that
that.
were saying that were issuing policies where they were forcing COVID patients to go into nursing homes. The truth is, before you have, I'm not unwilling to say I'm not a complete ANCAP or anything like that. Of course, there are times when the government should be allowed to temporarily restrict our rights. I just think the government has to be transparent and give the information why. It turns out that that restriction was a massive mistake. There is no evidence that it massively saved lives or that it was necessary. There is significant evidence that it harmed our economy, both nationally at the state level, and it benefited people at the wealthiest level. And similar policies that were occurring across the world actually made the problem worse across the world as well, including with supply chains. That's the problem. And you embrace that policy, an authoritarian policy. You don't have good evidence why you embraced it at the time. And now you're saying, well, I haven't really looked into it post-talk because it's
No,
not
you
something
won't
that
agree
I
with
care
any of
about
the
that much.
stats. You won't care about the stats or the studies because you can't give evidence about something that did not happen. And conservatives want to see it right in front of your face, or you won't believe it. Like I could say, like, oh, that car was gonna crash into a wall, and there's a kid behind the wall. It's like, well, if there was no wall there, it would have hit the kid, and you'll be like, it never hit the kid. Did the wall really stop it? It's like, yeah, the wall still stopped it. But all the if I bring up the Lancet or John Hopkins or NIH, it's all gonna be the same thing. Like, oh, how can I trust those studies? That's why I wanted to move to Donald Trump being authoritarian and bringing the biggest tax increase to American people in American history. And also, you talk about you don't give a shit about the wealthy. You support Donald Trump, who's the most corporatist, pro-wealthy person in American history. He's the most corrupt president we've ever had when it comes to insider trading and crypto and everything.
Give me an example of Trump's authoritarianism.
Donald Trump signed his authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Right now, he is trying to take federal oversight of Columbia University over their students' free speech.
Okay, so the argument would be censoring their free speech would be authoritarian.
No, the argument is putting a private university under federal control.
Okay, what if they told Columbia University instead of that, he said no one's allowed to go to the university? Would that be worse?
It'd be just as bad, yeah.
You think it would be worse?
Just as bad.
It would be just as bad. So saying, hey, we'll take away funding is different than saying we're physically not allowing anyone on the premise. That's equally bad.
I think it's authoritarian either way. We could argue two dictators, but they're both authoritarian.
Right. I won't disagree with you. You could say both things could be authoritarian, but there could be worse authoritarianism than others, correct?
Okay, I'm not saying he's literally Adolf Hitler, but he can't be Mao.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you're saying that. I didn't mention Hitler. I'm just saying it seems that like you seem to sometimes be arguing for the sake of arguing. It's like I think that it's easy to say, well, yeah, it would be a step further to say, oh, and we're shutting down
Trump
the university.
threatening law firms and getting pro bono legal work, and then saying that they're giving him a gift or whatever because he's threatening them legally to ban them from federal buildings, and going after someone that worked on the case against Fox News, the lawyers today. He literally signed executive orders today explicitly to tell the DOJ to go after like 2 individuals that were doing their legal job to say the 2020 election was certified correctly.
Okay, nonetheless, let's go back. I don't mind talking about this on the previous point that we were on. You can't admit that literally telling people they're not allowed to attend Columbia University and completely shut it down would be more authoritarian than saying we're going to take funding away?
Oh, if it was because you're going to bring back COVID back into it.
So what you're saying is you're unwilling to admit the truth because you think it'll benefit me argumentatively.
No, because it's not even a comparative point, because this is about free speech and politics and trying to take control of a university because there are students' free speech. If you're talking about like if COVID happened again and there was an order from a state, not the federal government, a state, because it's done by state. If a state said, hey, we're going to delay classes for a month and you need to make sure you have these precautions in, if it's a month, then we could talk about the arguments for that. But if we're talking about on the basis of free speech, that's a completely different ballgame.
Okay, so just to be clear, if a state then defunded Columbia University, you'd say that's fine. A state doing
Oh, not defunding it. No, not defunding it. No.
So if a state stops sending money to,
but
so
still,
I just want to be clear.
You're trying to reroute it back to COVID because you have to be in your little social, your culture war topic.
When
your
you
little
start
culture
to
war
talk about
topic. Ooh, the authoritarianism. I love it.
When you start to talk about authoritarianism, the truth is you cheered for a far more authoritarian government policy. And so your rings of authoritarianism ring hollow.
Yeah, you can't argue that point. You have to go back to this culture war. The COVID, Fauci, Dr. Fauci, you bring up Dr. Fauci again. You're like a parrot on repeat. Like you want to be a wind-up toy. Can you make actual points? Make actual points for Donald Trump right now. The biggest executive overreach is happening right now under Trump with the tariffs. That's unconstitutional. It's a dictator type shit. He's asking people to come to him for favors. He's bragging in the Oval Office about how much money him and his billionaire friends made yesterday. Bragging about that before he tells them to do insider trading because the market's going to be pumped. Like that's insane that you're going to divert back to COVID because that's where you have to fight in your home field.
It's not insane because what I'm talking about is people that cheered for radical authoritarian policies.
Oh no! Yeah, you're attacking the people who cheered for it. You can't defend Trump. The people who cheered for the COVID.
Attacking the people
you can't defend Trump.
Defend Trump. Can you defend Trump? You
can't defend
I'm talking
Trump.
about the politicians.
Who gives a shit about politicians? I'm talking to you about Trump. I'm talking to you about this authoritarian
Please stop interrupting me. Notice the
no, because you're trying to divert. You're trying to run from it. You're trying to run from it. Put me in my place. I'll put you in your place about this because you can't defend it.
Notice what you do is you constantly interrupt because you're
Notice what you do is you run away from the point. You can't talk about tariffs or taking over universities and deporting students based on their First Amendment right.
I'm not
on behalf of Israel.
What I'm talking about is people like you that cheered for massive authoritarian policies are now criticizing.
Oh yeah, people like me attack people like me. Don't attack the actual point because you don't have an actual standing here. Because the president's attacking the First Amendment in the biggest way ever, and you don't care because you care more about COVID. You have brain worms.
The First Amendment allows free association. Isn't telling people that they're not allowed to leave their house a bigger attack on the First Amendment? Isn't telling people that they need a vaccine passport to shop
if they would have said, if they said that any person who says something pro-Palestinian can't leave their house, but everyone else can go out, yeah, that'd be a huge attack on the First Amendment. Hell yeah, because this is targeted. This is targeted on one campus. Why are they targeting Columbia? Why?
I'll talk about this in a second.
They're targeting Columbia because of their free speech of the students. They'd be targeting every school if there's a public health emergency like COVID. But this is targeting one school because of their First Amendment right.
I'll talk about this. I don't mind once we get away from the point that you're trying to run from. And the point that I'm trying to make is that you're clearly running from the fact that when you lament authoritarianism, what you really mean is you don't like it when this political side that you don't favor engages in authoritarian policies that are that are objectively less authoritarian than the policies that you advocate.
Oh, it's objectively less authoritarian.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So attacking one school based on their First Amendment.
Shutting down.
Oh,
yes.
wait. Okay.
Stopping sending funding. Stopping sending funding is different than locking people down. Yes, it's not as authoritarian.
Okay, so if there's a tidal wave coming and it's going to kill everyone in the area, and you tell everyone to move, is that authoritarian if you grab them and move them?
You would probably say that yes, it's authoritarian, but it would be worthwhile.
Okay, so are you saying that Trump on Columbia is worthwhile?
I'm saying that there are arguments that you could make whether or not something's worthwhile. I'm saying that what happened with COVID was the people that cheered for that authoritarianism did not have reasons for doing it other than fear-mongering, which they never looked at the data to accept that. And I'm not running away. I'm directly answering the question.
Okay, so COVID was a global health crisis that just started, and we did not have information about. Once more,
what you're doing is interrupting because you're incapable of allowing some to articulate a point because you know you can't defend it. So they locked people down and they censored people and made fun of them by saying, "What do you want grandma to do?"
I heard you loud and clear, buddy. I heard you loud and clear. You would not shut up. You would not shut your mouth. You would not shut up. All I heard was people. I live in the middle of it, buddy. I heard this constantly on Facebook and Instagram, everywhere. Outside, people are screaming. Everywhere. There was no one getting arrested. They could all tell their shitty opinions to the crowd. What I'm talking about is Columbia University, the president attacking a school, literally with masked agents, with unmarked cars, pulling kids into their cars that have committed no crime except speech the government doesn't like. And you want to pivot back to COVID? Like this is why.
No, I don't want to pivot back to COVID.
And this is why I want to insult you because you are going back to this position and falling back into it because you have an ideological tie to it.
No, it has nothing to do with an ideological tie.
Yeah, because you have to fight in the COVID arena. You can't fight in the today arena.
You continue to talk about things like you call COVID a cultural issue. Would you say it's a cultural issue to the people that lost their businesses? Would you say, oh, it's just a
virtue
culture war
signal.
issue?
Talk about right now. Can you talk about 2025 at all?
It has nothing to do
You have
with
not talked
virtue
about the year
signal.
2025 because you're weak right now. Your points are so weak. Talk about the year 2025.
You can't defend
Talk about the year 2025.
I
was 6 years old in 2021. I don't even know what happened.
Just admit to everyone, I need to interrupt. I don't want to talk about it because
I don't want to talk about it because
and
I can't defend it. And I want Rob to defend the point on Colombia because the president right now is the biggest authoritarian we've had in the last 100 years as president,
except
FDR.
So you just made a statement, and my direct response to that was talk about the more authoritarian policies that you and Joe Biden cheered for.
Pivot. It's actually stunning how you have not talked about the situation I brought up literally one time.
It's amazing
because you have to stay back in your realm. This is why you're bad faith. Yeah.
If I said let's because I don't know what's not reaching.
The First Amendment's a big deal to me.
If I said Joe Montana is the best quarterback ever, and you said, wait a minute, let's talk about Tom Brady's statistics, and I'd say, pivot. You won't talk about Joe Montana. You would say, how can we discuss whether or not someone is the best or the worst if you're saying that we can't look at comparative analysis? And so when you say he is the biggest authoritarian, and I say that's not true, the topic we just got done talking about was more authoritarian, and you're like, that's just culture.
Who did the lockdowns? Okay. Who was president during the lockdowns, and who did the lockdowns?
There were Trump was president during the beginning of lockdowns that we saw. He wasn't personally doing the lockdowns. However, he embraced, and those policies were disgusting in his words and rhetoric that was embracing it. And then the lockdowns were primarily done by Democrats and
Republicans still did shutdowns. Republicans still did shutdowns.
And absolutely, they were authoritarian.
Okay, so Republicans and Democrats were both authoritarian. Okay, correct. Because both of them knew to different degrees what COVID was and what COVID, they also knew what they didn't know. So that's why Republicans and Democrats both operated off of their current information at the time to see how COVID would unfold. They both acted, and they both shut down their economies at the same time, Republicans and Democrats. Right now, the Republican president is targeting on the basis of speech legal residents or visa holders on the basis of their speech, and I want to talk about that because it's a bigger issue.
It's not a bigger issue.
We are bipartisan at the start of COVID. Bipartisan because we did not have information, and you want to be sleazy and bring up this information that we have now to go and rationalize your opinion because you know the Monday morning quarterbacking works for your narrative. But can we talk about the situation, the complete deterioration of the First Amendment that's happening right now in America?
It's not Monday morning quarterback because I was saying these things at the time and I was criticizing.
There's a reason Ron DeSantis did shutdowns.
Please stop interrupting. Please stop interrupting.
You keep lying. You keep lying. Talk about
not lying.
Bro, if you can't talk about the current stuff, I want to talk about the Columbia.
You tell me where I lied. You tell me where I lied in what I just said. Go ahead.
You keep acting like there was no reason because Republicans and Democrats both found a reason to close economies to see how COVID played out. Now, they both relinquished it at different rates, but at the time we did not have enough information to not do lockdowns because hospitals were overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed in Italy. That's how we knew about COVID to start with. That's why we weren't even prepared. We should have been. We could have been more ready, but that's why I think you're being dishonest because you keep on bringing it up like, I don't know what was happening during COVID. It became the #1 cause of death in America. You know damn well what was happening during COVID, even if it wasn't happening in the middle of nowhere, which I'm from the middle of nowhere. It was not happening where I was, but I know there were places where it was affecting, and that's why I want to get to the actual explicit point here.
You say I'm lying, but then you insert opinions that I never said. Where did I say I didn't know what was happening during COVID?
Because you keep on bringing it up as if you weren't alive.
I was alive, and that's what I'm saying.
As if there was no justification or reasoning to do what they did at the start of it.
Again, stop interrupting, right?
Because you still won't talk about the Columbia.
Please stop interrupting. We could get to Columbia.
Or the political prisoners.
Right? If you would stop interrupting.
We have political prisoners, and you're crying about the lockdown.
If you would allow the conversation to proceed forward instead of constantly deflecting and interrupting, then the conversation may get to a place that you would be more favorable. I'm talking directly to your comparative stance that this is the most authoritarian president in 100 years, the actions that are occurring right now, and I'm saying by a long shot, the things that occurred under COVID were worse. I'm saying there is a fundamental disagreement that people could see for themselves. What you're saying is, if there are questions, then violate people's rights. We didn't know.
I agree.
What was, please,
if I knew the situation now, I would have made a different decision back when COVID started. I would have also had a vaccine ready for COVID.
You have every right to say what you're about to say as soon as I finish, right? It is clear that the position you're coming from is, if there is a fear out there that we don't know about, then the default position should be for the government to be authoritarian and do things like lockdowns. Right? It shouldn't be, and what I say, the opposite. The impetus is on the government before they will behave in authoritarian ways to say, this is why this is necessary. We have planned out to the best of our ability what we think the impacts will be if we don't do this, what the impacts will be if we do this, and we think comparatively authoritarianism in this sense is the way to go here. That's true if you're talking about combating terrorism. That's true when you're talking about free speech. That's true when you're talking about protection from a disease, etc. And so when you want to talk comparatively about things that are more authoritarian, authoritarian and this being the most authoritarian. I think you're fundamentally wrong, and you've illustrated that actually your default position is to allow authoritarianism if you have questions, if you have uncertainty. I think that it should be the exact opposite.
Okay, so do you think that it's okay for Donald Trump to take political prisoners on behalf of Israel?
What
for their speech? For their speech, for all the immigrants being their visa being revoked on behalf of their from their speech. Right now, the State Department going through with no masks on, or with masks on, sorry, and unmarked vehicles, going in and tearing through these peaceful communities to take people into vans to ship them off to Louisiana on the basis of their speech. Because in my opinion, that's a really big thing to worry about.
Okay, so I will answer this question, right? First off, there's two different ways to look at this. There's the legality of it and the morality of it. I'll actually give you what you want. One of the things I've criticized Trump for heavily, I'm for defunding all of these universities. But if you're going to selectively do it, I think that what's occurring right now, if we're honest, is it's being done on the basis of protecting one country from their feelings being hurt, which is Israel. And I think it's despicable. And I think that it is something that we need to have a bright line for, to have an exact framework for when we're allowed to revoke visas, when we're allowed to revoke sort of student visas and things of that nature. However, I do think that as the United States, we have the right to people that aren't citizens in this country and are guests of this country, whether it be illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, green card holders, etc. We do have a right to say, if these people are antithetical to the United States, we could kick them out. That's different than sending them to prison. The due process isn't the same when it comes to having the right to continue to be a guest in the country. But having said that, I think that it is clearly being selectively applied on the basis of Israel, and it's something that I've criticized Trump over and over. The first person that got deported, Khalil, I forget his last name. You know who I'm talking about, though?
Do you know? Yeah, there's hundreds of students now.
So this was the first person, and there are allegations, and I'll ask you a couple questions about this. But in the future, there are allegations, for example, that he lied on his visa application and things like that. But it is clear that the initial targeting was because he was a visible person during these pro-Palestine protests. You would agree with that, right? I think we're both in agreement that that's why he was targeted. And I don't think that rises to the level of why we should be revoking someone's visa. But can I ask you a couple questions about this? Oh, you go ahead.
About this, or do you want to go? Because I was going to let you answer another question about lockdowns. Because I have one question about that.
We could go back to lockdowns, but while we're on this topic right now, so the question I'll ask you is, do you think the United States has the right to deport people that maybe didn't commit a crime, but we think are antithetical to the United States? For example, let's take this. If they're burning an American flag and saying death to America, free speech in the United States, me and you have the right to say that as citizens, but should we have the right to deport someone who's not a U.S. citizen that says that?
So this is an issue for me with like Congress, for example, because Congress is essentially in a cult-like mentality right now. So on the tariffs, on other powers Congress should have, they could pass laws or at least make their stance known on these issues, but they can't disagree with anything like Trump does. So it's really hard for me because, if you want to use legal justification, if the Secretary of State can say like, oh, I want to revoke a visa, then okay. The normal standard would be you give like a 30-day notice, like your visa has been revoked, and leave the country by this date. There should never be an instance where there's masks on and they're going to a university with an unmarked van and just like rampaging through communities. Like there might be an issue eventually if they go to a more conservative area maybe and they want to use their Second Amendment right. How do they know they're federal agents taking this poor girl into a van? So when it comes to this issue right now, I think the checks and balances of our government in general, our Constitution, but also just our government, it just is not functioning because you can't really question the leader. And the same thing with tariffs. They can rip across our communities and whatever. And Republicans, they're getting minor pushback with like Rand Paul and a couple others. But I think there's an issue right now with the Republican Party where it's valueless. It really gets just follow dear king. And that's really my biggest concern.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that framing, but regardless, let's take that framing out of it and the legality out of it and just say forget about the text of the Constitution or the INA or all these other things that regulate who we can deport and when. Do you think morally that the United States justifiably should be allowed to kick out guests of this country if they were saying something as simple as death to America and burning the American flag? Forget it's some man in a mask that does it. We need to start from a framework of, do people that are guests in this country, not citizens, have the same free speech rights as me and you? Right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a worthwhile question to ask.
I've said to many people I've spoken with in real life too, where they say, you know, well, China and Russia don't let you come in and criticize their country. And I'm like, bro, if you want to bring the laws of China and Russia and North Korea to America, go live in those countries. You can easily move from America if you want someone to be restricted and we want to use violence against tourists and whoever for you know, for just speaking, like going through phones. Like the fact that DHS is going through phones and everything, and they announced today they're going through social media feeds. They put up a post on social media which they quickly deleted today. I don't know if you saw it, but they said we have to prevent illegal people, money, and then it said ideas. We have to prevent illegal ideas from crossing over borders. And it's like, yeah, they're really just policing. And I want everyone to realize too, talking about China and bringing those policies here, they're using facial recognition technology and going through social media. If they're using facial recognition, just like the Patriot Act issues, and this is like Patriot Act on steroids that the Trump regime is currently doing, if they scan for faces of immigrants, if they scan for faces of anyone in this country, they're scanning all of our faces. They're scanning all of our faces and making a big database with all of our faces because they have to collect who's citizen, who's non-citizen. And that's like a huge Big Brother scenario that's happening right now. And I know Musk and a couple of the other Curtis Yarvin acolytes or whatever the hell those weird ass tech bros are, those brain dead nut draggers. Like they're following under this system where they think we need to be under mass surveillance. So I think we got to watch out for like Peter Thiel and Musk and this big cabal of these tech billionaires for sure.
I don't see how that was like. I'm not saying what you said there is true or not. I'm not like, it didn't seem to be an answer to the question at all. Like the question is pretty simple. We're just talking about like sort of philosophical principles of how a country should operate. Are you saying that that yes, citizens of this country have the exact same free speech rights as guests of this country? And so because we both agree as a United States citizen, we both have the First Amendment where we could say death to America. We should be able to say that, and we shouldn't be locked up for that. That's not a crime, correct? You agree with that portion. So should we, as a country, be allowed to kick out people that we bring in on a visa that say death to America? I hate America. They're going to rallies saying, I hope America dies. Or I'm pro-ISIS. You know, I think that ISIS is good. Should we have the right to kick those people out? Or, much like an American citizen, do they have the right to say that with no punishment?
Yeah, it's interesting there too, because if you have like someone who's an immigrant or a tourist and they're literally chanting "Death to America" marching through the streets, then you can have a sympathetic attitude where it's like, hey, why are we like, why is this person just like, it sounds like they're threatening people. So you could have a process for that possibly, but I don't think anything should be done unilaterally from one government official making a decision.
Well, okay, so I just am trying to get to a baseline. So you would say there could rise a level where speech that would be considered legal speech,
just like any speech, yeah.
Okay, but that would be enough to deport. So there is a lower tier of free speech available for people that aren't citizens that we could say, look, you've lost your privilege.
No, I would say no. From a principles perspective, I would say no.
You would say that same principle of free speech applies equally to the citizen as the
it would
non-citizen.
need to. It would need to.
That's insane. That's asinine.
I don't want the government. I don't want the government regulating any speech. I'm very libertarian
that's completely
there.
Okay. Having said that, would you feel the same
differently
way
at least?
Okay, so then you were against pro-life protesters that were locked up for protesting abortion clinics.
If there were any that are actually protesting, but usually they assault people or like directly harass them in their faces.
Many of them don't.
Okay, I need to find a case of this. Where
okay, you want me to find a case where someone was arrested that didn't physically assault? Okay.
Well, at least like didn't like spit in someone's face or like get in their face or
Well, get in face? What does that mean?
Spit in their face or harass them. I think harassment counts too, and stalking if that happened.
Okay, but what if it wasn't? If it was just, if there was someone that was locked up that just, because I believe, you could disagree with me if you want, we could look this up. I believe the law says that you can't be verbally dissuading people from abortions or criticizing abortions within certain footage areas of abortion clinics. You would be against that law.
I'm okay with that law for the protection of the other person's right to not be walking into the doctor and have some crazy screaming at them.
But you acknowledge that that's an imposition on their free speech.
I think it's actually infringing on someone else's personal rights.
Let's assume that that's true, but you would also be an infringement on their free speech.
I don't think that someone should be in front of any doctor's office yelling at you about your health decisions. That would be harassment. That would be targeted harassment.
You just previously said you always support free speech. You're pro-free speech. Now you're saying,
I support the same rights for citizens and non-citizens. I don't mean I support literally to calls to violence, of course. Anything that would not be covered under our legal definition of free speech in our court cases, I would not say.
So in this particular. So in this particular example, you think that curbing their free speech is a net benefit because the harm that they inflict by other people having the right not to hear that while they're going in to get an abortion outweighs their free speech right.
I think having, I think there's a reasonable amount of preventing harassment that is definitely justified there to protect the other person's rights.
Well, I think that shows that you're not someone who would be anywhere near sort of a free speech absolutist. And I'm just going to be honest with you.
But you know what the laws are, though.
Please, just let me finish. I'm not being very wordy here, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not calling you names or anything, but I heavily think that the reason that it seems that you've sort of done almost a 180 on free speech in this short period of time is because it aligns politically with your message. You're probably someone who's heavily pro-choice. And so you don't have a problem with locking up people or having laws of not allowing people to protest in abortion clinics. But if someone said, well, we're going to have a law that says that you can't support a terrorist organization like Hamas, you would have a big problem with that. You would say that's outrageous. That's a violation of their free speech.
No, because that would not be content neutral is a big part of this. So like, for example, the abortion thing, like that matters for pro-life or pro-choice. So it's content neutral. Content neutral laws on that basis to protect someone's right to walk into a doctor's office without being harassed is totally different from saying we're going to target a mosque or a church or whatever. Totally different.
What do you mean target a mosque? That's not the.
If you're targeting a specific religion, like I think.
But no one's doing that. Like no one's made that accusation other than me.
Okay, do you think
the Patriot Act targeting Islam?
Do you think a Nazi should be able to stand outside of a mosque screaming like Muslims are not human with a swastika?
I think if they're on public property, yes.
Okay, so if they're on the sidewalk in front of a mosque, a neo-Nazi should be able to like. Okay, I think
it's particularly if they're a citizen, that's free speech. You remember the Westboro Baptist Church people that were disgusting that would hold I can't use the word because but God hates homophobic slur.
Well, you can still do that, but it's a reasonable like limit outside. So like for example, if you're walking into the church, you don't need to see that you're subhuman every single day. It'd be like a law. It'd be content neutral, so it'd be any religious place of worship. It could be a mosque or a church or a synagogue, whatever. But I'd be in favor of a law that prevent let people go to church or a doctor's office without being harassed. Yeah.
Well, again, like, where do you draw the line in this? Like, then, for example, what if it's a climate change protest and they're on a public sidewalk and not leaving people, people are trying to get into, oh, hell, let's use an example that's happening right now. What if it's a Tesla dealership and people are screaming and not leaving people quickly enter a Tesla dealership to purchase a vehicle or to get maintenance on their vehicle? Would you be in favor of saying that should be outlawed?
Pretty sure
they're on the public sidewalk.
Isn't that, should it be outlawed if you're preventing movement of people to get into a business? Yeah, that should be illegal.
Preventing movement, that's a different level, but just sitting there screaming.
I'd be okay with
Should that be illegal?
I'd be okay with some type of limit from illegal grounds for harassment, targeting businesses. But then you're already committing civil disobedience if you go to over a certain amount. Or if you're doing vandalism, or if you're preventing movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're like the Tesla dealership's right there, and like you can't be on the sidewalk right in front of it, you need to be off to the side. I'm not talking about that you can create these limits where it's like you cannot be seen in public or anywhere near the place. I'm just saying that someone should not be able to be like directly harassed anywhere within physical reach.
But you seem to be conflating two different things. Like, I guess then it hinges on what we consider harassment. Because interestingly, you seem to be making the point that I'm making. Because if you remember, I'm actually defending like people like Khalil, because look, if this particular case ends up that he was doing more things, like for example, if he was committing a crime by trespassing, or if he was committing a crime by physically assaulting people, blocking people, etc., that's different than just his free speech. But I'm operating off the assumption that forget about his visa issues, that the reason he was targeted was for the idea that he was free speech and in the eyes of this administration was supporting Hamas. I don't like that. I think that is clearly, I think that Israel has too much control over our country when it comes to these sorts of policies, and it's one of the down points of the Trump administration right now. And I think that it is something that we need specific bright line in the courts to weigh in on. Where is it that we're saying that legal, people that are here legally, illegal is different, but people that are here legally that we're going to deport, I don't think that it rises to the level of their free speech entitlements the same as us as American citizens, but there needs to be a bright line of like, well, what's the type of stuff that they would say that we would say that's too much, we could kick you out. I think maybe death to America would rise to that level. I don't think saying, hey, I think Israel's going too far, there's genocide in Palestine, I don't think that rises to that level at all. And it doesn't matter if I agree or disagree with that statement. I just don't think having a geopolitical perspective. Now, if they're saying, and I support Hamas and I'm giving financial money to Hamas and Hamas is designated a terrorist organization, it gets wishier. But I don't like the way that it's it's playing out right now. The point that I'm trying to make to you, though, is we have to have sort of a philosophical understanding of what free speech means to us and when we're allowed to curb that. I think when you say, well, there are levels, like if you're physically stopping someone from leaving an area, yeah, that's a different crime altogether. That's a different set of problems. But when you say, I don't think you should be allowed there harassing them, I'm assuming that you're not talking about physically grabbing them or stopping them from entering. You're talking about them being right in front of Tesla on a sidewalk screaming, you suck, you're killing the world, Elon's a Nazi, you're a Nazi for buying a Tesla. Should they have the right to do that if they're allowing people to walk through them? Because it seems that what you're suggesting is you don't have the right to do that outside an abortion clinic. So are you also saying that for other areas where people would be shouting vile things at you on public property? And it seemed that you were like, well, not if they're spitting on them, not if they're blocking them from entrance. We agree those are totally different issues, just as the speech issue. That's the question I have.
So there was I'm trying to see let me see. I'm trying to find the actual court cases for this too, because I think that is somewhat of a guidance of what we can do. So what's considered reasonable for this would be like 8 to 15 feet. So like that's what I mean when I say like they can still be present and still protest, but it's not enough to like create physical altercations or enough to like literally be screamed in the ear. And you could shut them off from your vision as well. So like the example of like the Nazi standing out of a mosque, or pro-lifer standing out of a Planned Parenthood or whatever. So I think that 18 to 15 feet, it seems like that's usually legally held up, which is something I'd consider to be like, pretty reasonable as well. But then like 35 feet, Massachusetts tried doing this. 35 foot, the Supreme Court struck down 9-0 unanimously in 2014, saying 35 feet violated speech to a large extent. So I'd be okay with like 8, like that, like I just said, the 8 to 15 feet seems reasonable for like the Tesla example as well.
Okay, well, there's a problem though. I don't know if you caught that. I kind of lay a little trap for you here, right? The problem is, if the U.S. government, if the Trump administration embraces that same mentality and says every single student that we locked up screamed and harassed people within 10 to 15 feet of the entrance of college buildings, then haven't they just committed a crime?
No, okay, so what I'm talking about right now is like, for example, if they would have said like, if they would have accused someone of a crime in this situation and not made it explicitly about speech, then they could. If there was rules about like, for example, like if they were outside of a synagogue or a mosque, whatever the protest was, and they were doing this and they violated that, then you can argue they're being civilly disobedient in a way that targets another culture or race. But now they're connecting the anti-Israel to anti-Semitism and saying they hate America as well. So like that's the big issue with like their framing of it and the unilateral powers. Because like, by the way, like this would never stand up in a court if like on the basis of freedom of speech. I doubt it's going to stand up anywhere with like the current process they're going through. But if what you just said was like, if what you just said was a law, if it was a law that they couldn't be within 8 to 15 feet or whatever, and they were like literally standing in front of the door and shouting slurs at someone and harassing someone, then that's a little bit different. But it's also just a general protest to a foreign country that we fund and protesting a war that they're doing. So it's different than like protesting the person's identity in front of you.
Let's be honest. Many of these protests weren't just people saying, hey, we're just criticizing Israel. There were certainly things that were being said that could reasonably be construed as anti-Semitic. Well, and there's a lot of people that seem to be reasonable that are of Jewish orientation that said that they not only felt harassed but felt intimidated. So you get into murky waters when you're like, well, I think that this sort of language is okay, but once it enters the area of like 7 to 15 feet, then I don't think it's okay. And just saying, well, if it was a crime, that's one thing. Well, that's not going to really help you, because I think you're actually wrong when you're looking at the legality of this, because my understanding of reading some of these policies is deportation is not considered a punishment. And sort of the way that like the INA is written said is we could basically deport people for any reason, that they're here at our privilege. And so like some of the reasons are like pretty vague. And so if someone could make that may be fine. You may not like it, but if you are embracing this idea, and if your idea that you're embracing here would be embraced by sort of the Democratic Party as whole, theoretically, which is, you can shout harassing stuff, whatever, that makes people feel that they're being harassed, as long as it's outside of 15 feet. But once it enters inside of 15 feet, well, I think that's different. I think that there should be a law against that.
The thing is,
real quick, I
you're going over so many points. You're kind of demonizing me in the process.
And we could prove that these people were within 15 feet of like an entrance to a college building, then it would seem, based on your rationale and the fact that they don't have to commit a crime to be deported, that would be reason enough to say, well, that's harassment and we should be allowed to deport people for harassment.
Okay, if they were going up to Jewish students and saying, we hate Israel, you're at fault, that's a totally different thing. That's targeted harassment, which is what I'm talking about with the mosques and what I'm talking about with with the Planned Parenthoods. And like with the entire situation we're having here as well, you mentioned Jewish students. There are millions. There's thousands. Sorry, not millions, but there's thousands of Jewish students who are speaking out against Israel, and their voices are completely suppressed on these campuses. And the students they're not listened to at all. There's Jewish voices that are very against what's happening right now, as far as revoking visas and what Israel is doing right now, and not being fond of the Israel government. So I think it's not good to act like all Jewish students are going to be
I'm not acting like
happening.
that at all. I think that honestly, it's quite stark to me. I've personally been on campuses, particularly in the debate community, where I have been harassed for being white. No one gives a shit about that. Like, you ain't gonna see the Trump administration deporting people for that. You can continue to have curriculum to talk about the problems of whiteness. That ain't gonna lead to anybody being deported. So I think that there's a problem with this. I think that it is clear that Trump has a strong relationship with the nation of Israel, and that there were people legitimately that felt threatened by a lot of these protests that were Jewish, but there's an awful lot of more people that want to make excuses for any valid criticisms of Israel as being anti-Semitic. And they will stretch the law and stretch their influence they have in order to make sure that it's highly punishable. I think even more troubling than a lot of this stuff is a lot of the sort of hate speech laws and the way it's written that you see being suggested by Republicans all around this country that say certain things that you would say would be considered anti-Semitic that I think are legitimate protests. I thought it was ridiculous when it was it Ilhan Omar that said about AIPAC, it's all about the Benjamins? And everyone was like, well, that's anti-Semitism. I disagree. You're talking about one of the successful lobbyist groups in our country who's clearly using their money and influence to influence the United States, and you're saying that it's racist and bigoted to mention that it's about money to them? Of course it is. It's not because they're Jewish. The fact that Jewish people might have that stereotype that, oh, if someone criticizes me about money, it's because I'm Jewish. No, maybe it's because I think you're doing bad things with money. It has nothing to do with your ethnicity. So I'm in agreement with you that I actually have big problems with the way this has been done. Now, this conversation's separate from illegals. We should be able to kick any illegal out at any point whatsoever because they're not here legally. I don't give a shit if the reason we give for that is they're criticizing Israel or not. But it's a different question when it comes to people that aren't citizens with legal status. I would like to see some sort of bright line. I'm probably closer to saying, yes, I'm okay with deporting certain people for certain language. But I would like to see exactly what the government is saying. This is the line that if you go over this language, we could deport you. But I think you're directionally correct that the reason that these people are being targeted is because they're criticizing Israel. And I have a massive problem with that. And I've said so, not just on my show, but I don't know if you know, like this lawyer I debate all the time, Pisco. We had a big conversation about this like 2 weeks ago, where I talked all about this. You can find it at my channel. So your pushback that I'm not going to talk about this, because I'm only pointing out that a lot of people like Pisco that are talking about this authoritarianism like you were perfectly fine with what I think is objectively far more egregious authoritarianism that we've seen in past administrations.
I agree. Ron DeSantis is way worse than Trump is, because Ron DeSantis did lockdowns and Trump didn't, because he was not a governor, but he would have if he was a governor.
It's interesting. There's an interesting argument to be made there. Clearly, Trump embraced lockdowns after DeSantis, right? So from the perspective of a DeSantis supporter, which again, I favored DeSantis in the primary over Trump. From the perspective of a DeSantis supporter, you would say, yeah, but Trump embraced lockdowns long after and then criticized DeSantis for lifting out the lockdowns, which is true. But if you're a Trump supporter who wants to criticize DeSantis, what you would say is, but Trump never signed the order to do the lockdown and DeSantis did. It's an interesting philosophical question of who you put more blame. I tend to lean more towards it was authoritarian by DeSantis. It was terrible. He should be held to some account. He has apologized for it, but it's still terrible. But still, the president of the United States paying lip service to lockdowns and criticizing DeSantis for lifting them makes him worse on lockdowns than DeSantis. That's where I fall in.
Just so we can reroute back to this for a second before we get off here. We've been talking for a while, and thank you for chatting too.
Yeah, no problem. I thank you for coming on. I was supposed to do a debate tonight, so I had nothing to talk about. We were talking about Luka Doncic and the fucking Mavericks, so I'm glad.
I was actually just in Pittsburgh because I travel around for work a little bit. But if I'm ever in Western PA again, maybe I could let you know we could do an in-person debate with Pittsburgh in the backdrop or something. But yeah, just on the tariffs, okay, my big points that I have an issue with, okay, so there's no proven theory where this moves manufacturing jobs. Now, factories will take maybe 3 to 5 years to build, maybe longer to get entire supply chains, okay, so my economic issue aside from the issue that Congress should be doing this, it should not be a president. And Congress essentially said we're hands off. Trump can keep on doing tariffs. Some senators, like I said, Rand Paul, are pushing back against it. But having this rapid policy that changes all the time is not going to spur the 5 to 10 year investments that we need to move manufacturing back to America. It's a very unstable plan, and countries are getting annoyed that Trump is shifting the tariffs every single day, and business owners are as well. Like, well, how am I going to make a long-term plan for this? Now, and my other point as well is we're doing a huge tax cut again, mostly going to, and the biggest portion is the top bracket. But also we're kind of replacing that revenue with tariffs, which are going to affect more so than income tax would, like a sales tax to the American people. I don't want working class Americans to pay for a problem that the ultra wealthy largely caused, and they also profited from it. So in my opinion, it would make more sense to find a funding mechanism that taps from them to fund this transition. If we do need to bring manufacturing back, we should be having them finance most of it or pay for most of it, because they're going to benefit from it when we do that. So with those 2 points, where it's like a rapid economic policy, how can businesses adapt to it? And also like it's taxing the American people, which I think is unfair.
Okay, so you're going to be surprised that there's some agreement that we have on this, actually, okay. Right? So the first thing is the idea of Congress. That was the first thing you said. I sort of agree. I think that Congress has abdicated its fiscal responsibility in huge ways under both Republican and Democratic presidents, and it's outrageous. Like, Congress is supposed to control the power of the purse. The truth is, the biggest problem, in my opinion, with our country is that you could just give me a quick answer. What do you think the strongest branch of government is?
I think it definitely should be Congress.
But what would you say it is? I agree with you.
There's a huge issue with executive power, and this goes through like every president.
Yeah, but I would say specifically, I agree with you, but I would say specifically it's the bureaucratic state. Like, I think the previous administration showed us, like, Joe Biden wasn't running the show. Like, the problem is presidents come and go, but this unelected bureaucratic state that's really in charge of making the on-the-ground decisions, they're the ones that are sort of unaccountable, and they're making the decisions that remarkably affect us, whether that be Obama, whether it be if McCain would have won, whether it be George Bush, etc. That's where the real things are getting done. So, for example, even when it comes to funding, the truth is, I think you would agree with me, like, the way we do funding in Congress is a joke. We wait until, like, it's almost the 0 hour, and then we pass these continuing resolutions or these omnibus bills that are thousands of pages that are riddled with pork that almost no congressperson that's voting on it's read the entire thing, and even if they did, they haven't had time to understand. Like, I think we both agree that's a big problem, right?
I think we need to also, like, so I'm not against the bureaucracy in a sense of, well, if you view it as like we have one executive that's a president, they have like their cabinet and they should control the show, then that definitely can be your perspective there. But I think that's more directly unitary executive and more authoritarian than it would be, because the bureaucracy is a buffer made by agencies that Congress is putting into law. It's a buffer that, like, when you vote for a president, you're voting for the entire administrative state. I did not vote for Joe Biden. I did not vote for Kamala Harris. I did not vote for Obama. I voted for who they're going to have working for them. Same with Trump. They hand him executive orders. She's like, what is this one? I have hot dogs. Well,
so you find it,
hot dogs. It's like he doesn't know what the things are that he's signing either.
Okay, so you find the Democratic criticism of, like, oh, it's not really Trump, it's people like Mucks, that you think that's an absurd criticism, because it turns out that there were unelected people before whose name you don't know that had access to the very same information that that the Democrats are criticizing someone like Musk having.
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm voting for the platform. I think the real politics is in Congress and also state politics for sure.
Well, I guess I'll just give my perspective on this.
Okay.
I think you're underselling sort of the power of the bureaucracy and the fact that it basically stays the same throughout even changing administrations of changing political parties.
That's
those people are. It's not a good thing. It's a very bad thing. They're unaccountable. So let's look at just, for example, the power of the purse specifically. If you're someone that's concerned that Congress should be the most powerful branch and you think that they've been abdicated to executive authority, think of how this goes. Congress signs this funding bill that's thousands of pages that almost none of them have read, and it gives this money, but the devil's in the details of how the money's spent. So, for example, like something like USAID, they might sign something that's like $5 billion to cancer research. But the way that's being implied is being done through these bureaucratic agents that aren't elected, that are basically staying there through one presidential term to the next. They basically stayed there from W. Bush to Obama, from Obama to Trump largely, from Trump to Biden, and they'll be there from Biden to Trump. And that's why we see these decisions that end up benefiting sort of people that aren't the middle class, that aren't the working class, because the real power in Washington isn't changing. It's always the status quo. And so I don't disagree with you that I think a better policy would be, we have too much, whether it be with tariffs or whether it be with sort of attacks, declaring war, etc. Congress was supposed to be the ones that are more on point in that, but they've abdicated their responsibility. And it's not even the president, it's people behind the president, most of which never changed, that are an unelected bureaucracy. This should scare the shit out of everyone, right? Like, for example, when Chuck Schumer said that the president of the United States in 2016 couldn't criticize the FBI because if they did, they'd find 6 ways of Sunday of getting back at them. Donald Trump is the leader of the FBI. He is the leader of that agency. And here is his direct opposition, the most powerful Democrat at that point, Chuck Schumer, saying, we can't criticize the FBI. They're unelected and they'll screw us over. They'll find 6 ways of Sunday. Like that, it doesn't get more unelected than that, right? And those people are here to stay. So I do agree with you that the problem isn't just with Trump, it's that historically, and we can see when it comes to these issues of tariffs specifically, I forget what president it was, where they signed this legislation that basically gave tariff responsibility to the president. So it seems entirely legal. But I think you're right. I would prefer that we have actually members of Congress that are doing their job and actually doing things when it comes to the power of the purse and doing things when it comes to international trade. I think for an emergency level, I don't have a problem with president having temporary emergency powers over things like tariffs, etc. But that, I'll give you a chance to respond. That's what I feel. I'm directionally in agreement with you that I would rather Congress be doing this stuff, but they're not going to because they're worthless.
So like Congress is the entire issue. The gridlock in Congress, the fact it's dominated by their stock trading and their inability to focus on good policy, that's the issue with the executive, in my opinion. Because if they wanted to change the culture of these different agencies, they could. They could pass more clear laws so they run more effectively. They could, make different standards on when to hire and fire people, which can help the president, if there is an issue, go through a legal process to fire someone, to identify the problems, which are some legal processes for removing people that Trump kind of bypassed a few times. That's a different conversation. My overall thing is why I think it's a good thing why you have career bureaucrats is because you want people from, like, I'm happy there's people from Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush again, Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump, because that is an anti-corruption mechanism within itself. That's why I don't like the unitary executive theory, because their goal is to fire all the other people that could be a balance on their power, instead of having to be like I want the government to be made up of, Republicans and Democrats, even in the executive. But if we don't have a bureaucracy that is set by Congress, that Congress actually maintains, and that's the big issue for me, is the lack of Congress, because we basically don't have a Congress anymore. It's complete BS. But that's my issue. I think it's an anti-corruption mechanism. But after you answer this, I want you to
anti-corruption to who?
It's anti-corruption for the executive branch. So it's not like there's only Democrats interpreting the law or only Republicans. You have a mixture of both. But once you respond to this, I just want to know what would you do to? Are there any reforms that you would pass to fix Congress?
Sure. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. But it's anti-corruption to people who would threaten the status quo. But those that have the power, like, for example, if you look at the first impeachment of Trump, over and over you had people from the State Department saying Trump was going against our foreign policy. But Trump's the leader of the State Department. He sets the foreign policy as the duly elected leader. So the problem is the bureaucrats that came from Obama, that came from W. Bush, that came from Clinton, those bureaucrats in that chain of it were saying, it's our policy, we set the policy, and we expect the president to go along. And this goes back to what Chuck Schumer was saying. If you get someone in there that says, no, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that the real power lies with the bureaucracy, and so we're going to challenge that, then they'll come after you. And you could say, well, that's an anti-corruption mechanism, because that ensures that if you get a Republican president that's corrupt, the bureaucratic state could go after them. If you get a Democratic president that's corrupt, but what happens if the bureaucratic state's corrupt? And the status quo, you say that you like that, well, then you're advocating for a status quo, and you could understand why people want radical change, because that status quo certainly has won and been good for the people at the top of this country, but it has been abysmal for the people in the middle of this country. And they're waking up to that fact. They were lied to about the promises of the people that run these mechanisms, about NAFTA, about China entering the World Trade Organization. And they've been repeatedly told how great the economy is doing, because we point to things like the stock market, we point to things like GDP. All the while, we are entering unsustainable levels of debt, and there's no accountability because these people aren't elected anyways. You don't even know most of their names that are running these bureaucratic.
One big point then.
What's that?
There's one big point about this, though. Like, so there's executive power, and that executive power is delegated through all these agencies that Congress made. Now, if you get rid of the agencies, my concern is you're not getting rid of executive power. So the president then, with the unitary executive theory they're looking to achieve, has all that executive power siphoned to only him, essentially, because all the cabinet members are yes people. They're going to say yes to whatever Trump says. So my thing is the big bureaucracy makes it harder for the executive for one person, like the president, to control the entire executive branch as a unitary executive. And that's my big thing right now. If like, I might be able to agree with you in some areas if Congress took back tons of power from the executive, but I think that's completely not going to happen ever. But the executive will still have way too much power, even if you fire people from it. The government's big or smallness is a power thing, not a people thing.
I don't disagree, but the problem is if I accept everything that you just said, and there's a lot that I agree with there, right? I still think that the bureaucracy is the real problem, but certainly it comes through the executive having more power because the bureaucracy is there as part of the executive than Congress, and Congress has abdicated their power, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is, at least in my world, when you're saying unitary executive, blah, blah, like all that stuff, like at least there's accountability in the fact that we can get rid of it in 4 years. How do we get rid of the bureaucratic state? Who votes on getting rid of that? If Congress is unwilling to do the job and the president is neutered by them because they're really running the show and they'll go after presidents that challenge them, as Chuck Schumer's even admitted, then what's the mechanism for ending that?
You need to prove they're not following laws by Congress, because all they can do is follow the laws and execute them. So you have to find like which laws of Congress are passed that the executive is not following. Because if the bureaucracy is not following the laws, they're not following the law in general. That can be challenged. But like the Congress needs to pass better laws. I think you're blaming the executive and bureaucracy for the fault of Congress.
Well, but still, if we've both admitted that Congress won't do it. So at least the world I'm talking about has accountability in that we could point to, that's the guy that made the decision, Trump and the cabinet guy that he appointed. We reject them. It might take 4 years, but we will vote them out of office and their people, and we'll put in their opposition. The way it works today, we can't do that. We're both admitting that Congress isn't doing anything to change it, and Congress should do more. So in that world, why would we prefer a bureaucratic state that members of Congress are admitting we're afraid of? Because if we go after them, they have the power. And the idea that it's like, well, what can they legally do? Well, it's not a matter of legality. Legally, Congress has abdicated this responsibility and allows, for example, on things like funding, allows these organizations to have this sort of monolithic control on how this money is put into effect. And so,
well, I hate Chuck Schumer, so.
Okay, but from my perspective, like, look at it from someone like me, like, hell, let's take me out of it. I'm not a big pro-life, pro-choice, but I am pro-life, but it's not something I talk about a lot. I think people are more articulate on that position than me. But like, why, for example, should my tax dollars go to USAID to fund abortions in another country? Why should that occur? But I have no say over that. If Congress would vote on it, then yeah, I could have some say by voting. But Congress is going to abdicate the responsibility, and instead we say, well, that's just HIV funding. And so it falls under that umbrella, and those mechanisms can do what they want. How would you feel if we took all of that money that went for HIV funding and funded pro-life, pro-Christian programs in Africa? Wouldn't that infuriate you?
Well, they're kind of doing that now. Like, my issue, like, they're using my money to take political prisoners. So, like, you know what I mean? So that's already an example of it.
No. So it's different than you disagree with sort of immigration policies that are being acted by the president versus the funding question. The funding question is, we fund sort of causes that Congress has said, here's a cause worth funding. Stopping fire damage in Somalia. But the way that funding gets put into almost always is anti-populist, pro-democrat, pro-progressive sort of mentalities. For example, we fund PBS through this that's clearly progressive, hates populism, hates conservatism. This happens over and over again. So from that perspective, if we're both offering competing visions and we're both saying the solution would be Congress actually being responsible, but both of us are in agreement that ain't happening anytime soon, and that hasn't happened. So in solution one, you have your solution of the status quo, which we could see the harms of the status quo, of not only how it's hollowed out the middle class in this country, not only how like our Congress is afraid of them and our presidents are afraid of them, but that it funds things that are directionally oppositional to me and there's no accountability to it. Versus the second, which is, okay, you might not like the president, and if they had more control, might fund things that's directly oppositional to you, but at least there's accountability in the fact we'd know who's doing it, and we could remove them from office.
It's just hard, like, when Trump is going through and just, like, firing FBI agents that worked on January 6th, and he's just, like, denying basic rule of law, or, like, when the attorney general is just, like, dismissing Mayor Adams' corruption cases and a bunch of other crazy things. I want there to be a layer of protection from if a corrupt president comes into office who wants to violate laws and break laws. You want people in charge who are, people in the bureaucracy that are not going to break laws. Because if the president can bring in new bureaucrats every time, he could just bring in yes people to bypass all laws, and that's basically what they're doing right now. But like, it still is, the issue still is with Congress. And you said before, you're probably against every government agency. I'm in favor of agencies doing things, and we need agencies and bureaucrats to carry out the laws if we have laws. But you're against like funding education. I'm sure you get rid of the Department of Education. So like something like that,
yes,
I'd be pro something like that. But I'd say, okay, instead of eliminating it, let's write laws to make it better. And if they don't follow the laws, then we can talk about restaffing them. But I never want to be just like, I don't like these people, so we got to replace them.
Well, I think that a big problem is that the federal government is way too big and is involved in way more things than it should. The Department of Education would fall into that. I think since the creation of the Department of Education, which if I'm not mistaken wasn't created by an act of Congress, but was created by an executive order, I think since the creation of that, we've seen education in our country decline rapidly, even though we've increased funding for education to the point where it's a joke in many of the areas where you'd want it to be most successful, such as in the inner city. And as you know, in rural communities, education oftentimes a joke, public schooling in there. But that's a conversation for another day. I don't mind having it. But I certainly think that there should be some executive agencies. Like we should have an executive agency for law enforcement, like the equivalent of what the FBI does. We should have executive agencies for the State Department, et cetera. Of course, those sorts of things should exist. The problem I have is like, you're like, well, I want them there to ensure that a president's not being corrupt. But what happens if they're corrupt? Like, for example, what do you say to the whistleblowers that came out from the IRS and the FBI that said, for example, Ziegler and Shapley, that were saying, look, we were doing our job like we would with anyone else, looking into financial crimes of the Bidens, and basically the FBI told us, no, you can't do that. How do we stop that corruption?
I can't verify that story. Do you have another example that I might know about?
Well, like, there are stories replete with the fact that our FBI is targeting as aggressively as possible people like Trump, that Chuck Schumer told us that they would because he criticized the FBI, and then defending the people that they said privately were saying, and even sometimes publicly, that they wanted to win, like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden.
Chuck Schumer's such an idiot. Like, Chuck Schumer is literally the dumbest person on the planet. And if I ever run for politics, I hope they find this because he's so unpopular. Like, Chuck Schumer's literally the biggest dumbass ever. I hope he never shows his face again. I want someone else to be the leader. Holy shit, why would you say that? Because like Trump did illegal shit, but then Chuck Schumer says dumb shit like that, and it makes it seem like it's invalid all the cases are brought against Trump. And we'll talk about that later. But it's just so Chuck Schumer is just a political mess. I can't even say the words I want to use to describe that dumbass. But anyways, I am losing gas.
That's fine. We could wrap it up. Just to talk real quick, if you want me to respond to the other tariff stuff you said, that was just the point on Congress. Directionally, I agree with you. Congress should have more control, right? The other points you made about tariffs, I think you made two other points. The predictability. You're not wrong, right? Like, to me, tariffs are more successful as a negotiating strategy. Would you agree that there are certain countries, you don't have to say all, you can think that Trump's gone overboard, but there are certain countries, many of which are considered our allies, that have erected unfair trade barriers against the United States?
Unfair is a big word there for me.
Okay, let's take the word unfair. They have erected barriers that surpass.
Yeah, I'm not saying tariffs cannot exist in any capacity.
Well, no, I'm not saying. But what I'm saying is, if from the tariffs would benefit one country and harm another, correct?
That's hard. It could harm a country if they do it too aggressively. But if they do it at like small amounts for like targeted, what everyone says, targeted tariffs can work. Sure. Okay,
so then what does the country that's on the losing side of that targeting tariff do if they can't tariff in response to that? For example, let's not talk hypothetical. Europe heavily tariffs the United States automobile industry. If the United States wants their automobile industry to thrive and be able to have access to the European market, and these tariffs exist, what's the recourse that the United States could do?
The U.S. could probably leverage, like right now we leverage our defense a lot throughout the globe. Like when we talk about financial deals or trade deals, I think leveraging the U.S. defense or opening trade routes would probably make more sense than just like tariffs as a negotiation tactic.
I think certainly the things you're saying there are possibilities, and Trump's doing that. Trump is leveraging our defense. That's one of the things he talks about heavily, and even in his first term, he leveraged criticizing heavily the amount of defense being spent in NATO and European countries failing to meet their obligations, et cetera, et cetera. But the point that I'm trying to make here is the status quo has been one where this has just gone unabashed. Our allies have taken advantage of it. So there is
There's no evidence of that, though.
That's the auto tariffs.
Well, America's the rich. Like, we still have a lot of cars in like Europe, for example. We have hundreds of thousands of cars in Europe per year. Like, and like taking advantage of us is a big word when we're the richest country of all time. Like I said before, we're getting a lot of benefit from these trade deals, but the working people and middle class people are not getting the benefits from those directly. Wait, are you saying you're just like, are you saying you're like generally pro tariff or like pro what Trump's doing right now? Because I feel like this is
I'm generally anti-tariff, but to me,
okay.
it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? For me, it is to threaten tariffs and to threaten unpredictable or strong politically posturing, particular to our allies, but also to our enemies that are putting barriers up to free trade, is a defensible position to their barriers to free trade from a free tradist perspective. So I think even a libertarian that wants like pretty much zero government intervention could adapt the position that, look, we're not starting from a clean slate where no one has trade barriers and then all of a sudden Trump starts to erect them. We're starting from a position of a bunch of countries have all sorts of different trade barriers. Maybe it's VAT taxes, maybe it's tariffs, maybe it's laws that they have that say that there are certain things that they're not allowed to import. So for example, maybe it says we won't accept your agriculture because it's genetically modified, or we won't accept your livestock because you give it such and such a hormone, which we won't attack. And that erects some sort of trade barrier, whether rightly or wrongly, that you agree with. And because of that, one of the ways that you ultimately try to eliminate that barrier is erecting barriers yourself that sort of causes a mutual pain as a negotiating tactic to remove them down. So in this sense, in particular, when you talk about predictability, I don't disagree that you're correct. There is a problem with creating a massively unpredictable situation. Businesses thrive on predictability, and would you want to invest your money in creating a company if you thought that on a whim presidents could change their minds on trade policy? Probably not. That's something, you're absolutely right about that. But on the other hand, being unpredictable can be an advantage, because if Europe looks like, not just with tariffs, by the way, there's solid evidence that there was a bunch of intel that was buried in 2016 that said actually Putin preferred Hillary Clinton because she's so predictable, because it would just be an extension of the business as usual foreign policy that we had through Obama, through Bush, through Clinton, etc. So they knew how to react to that. The problem with Trump is he's a wild card, and people are like, we don't know what to do. And so we're going to mind our P's and Q's because he might do something. Everybody knew if Kamala Harris won, she wasn't going to do shit about the trade barriers, for example, in our European allies. They knew that. Right now, as we speak, the EU is threatening to fine U.S. social media companies billions, if not trillions of dollars for not censoring what they call disinformation. That is a massive attack on U.S. businesses, and that's going to go through, particularly if Kamala wins, without any push whatsoever from the executive branch or Congress in this country, which is despicable. So the unpredictable nature could convince Europe, listen, this guy may be willing to sabotage his entire country's stock market and to increase consumer prices because he's so pissed off at us because of what we've done. Maybe it's time to sit down. Whereas they would have never came to that conclusion. So I'm not saying that what you're saying is not without warrant. Certainly you could go too far and create such an unpredictable environment that it ends up worse off in the future. But that unpredictability can be an advantage. And if you don't mind, I'll say something real quick about the second part that you said, which is I think the fatal flaw in Trump's plan here is ultimately because we have a representative democracy. If his plan was to work, it would take years and years and years. But I think Europe, if they're smart, would realize all we got to do is hold out for 2 years till the midterms. If the United States citizen is paying more in products because of that, and if manufacturing isn't coming, then they're likely to elect people that repudiate Donald Trump, which will mean that he'll have to give in because Congress would be more likely to step in there. And so I think because if there was a possibility of this long-term strategy working, I think Europe will understand because of the changing nature of our electoral system that they might be able to wait it out.
Okay, so like the big points against like what they've been saying, like Australia and the U.S., we have a trade surplus, a pretty big one. And then like the EU said they dropped tariffs to 0, and Trump said that wasn't good enough. He said you have to buy $350 billion of our goods. He put tariffs on Canada and Mexico at 25% for no reason. And he's threatening Mexico again tonight as we're talking. He said they violated a treaty from 1944 about water. And also our U.S. 10-year bond yields, I think we're hitting like above at 5% again, which is extremely high. Other countries are abandoning us.
That's more worrying than the stock market, by the way.
And Trump needs to, like, if Congress doesn't take power back from Trump and he keeps on doing this wishy-washy stuff for another 3 months, I feel like we're gonna have a financial collapse. Because we need solid policy that's gonna stick. That's not gonna change every single day. The market can't handle it, and Americans and small businesses can't handle it either. And my big thing as well is just like, just because something is good for the market doesn't mean it needs to be bad for people. It just is that way because of our system. But we could all grow in a decent market. None of us can grow in a bad market in unpredictable territory. So like, if Trump doesn't pull off this quick, or at least find a solid footing, or maybe give some power back to Congress, I think we're going to go through a couple, turbulent weeks, or maybe a few months. It's really, but if he keeps on doing this exactly, I don't know what's going to happen, because this is unprecedented economic shakeup. Like, we already had a lot of credit card debt and a lot of auto loans and a lot of other, and the housing mortgages are defaulting at higher rates since like 2008. So we have a lot of stuff coming up.
Would you say, I know this is a very complicated question, but just to simplify, would you say that the status quo as we'd seen it for the past 20 years was not sustainable?
Not sustainable in terms of economic inequality. Like, we're at the point where there's usually a collapse in the system, whether it's a revolution or whatever. Like, every time we get to this point of inequality, people get really unhappy, and I think it's a power struggle, because people at the bottom have no power. It's not even about material. They feel powerless. They see people in these nice mansions and all these politicians, and they want a different system. But I think you can break the status quo in a way that's better or a way that's worse. And I think right now it's just becoming fragmented, and not like, we don't have a plan to build for something for 5 to 10 years. If Congress passed a law that's like, okay, we're going to have this year to make a trade deal, because like the Canada-Mexico trade deal took like 2 years. Every other trade deal takes a long time too, like with like South Korea. Our trade deal with like our relations with Australia took a long time. If we had a bill that said we're going to put like 10% tariffs here, 5% here, we're going to do these tax credits for American businesses, a couple subsidies maybe, and here's our 5 to 10 year plan to rebuild America, sort of like a CHIPS Act in a way that, and you can imagine, just like when you go to bed tonight, dream of a CHIPS Act that you would like, okay? Your version of a CHIPS Act. If we had something like that with a 5 to 10 year structure, completely different scenario. But right now, there's no reason to be confident in where the U.S. is economically as a trade partner.
Okay, so I'll say I think that it is not sustainable for some of the reasons you said, and I think others, the massive debt that we're having, also the fact that we're reliant on certain manufacturing goods that are quite necessary to our country in a litany of ways, such as steel, rare earth metals, production of medicine, production of ammunition, etc., from countries that we consider our biggest geopolitical threat, like China. None of this was sustainable. As China continues to rise, if we are this reliant on them, we're hosed. But I think you absolutely make a valid point about income disparity. And this is a point that people miss all the time, right? It's not just, even in the United States, where you see levels where you see like increased crime and stuff, it's not just necessarily, oftentimes it certainly is the lowest impoverished level, but a lot of times what you see is there's a lot of animosity because of the wealth disparity. So if you live in a community, let's say you live in a community that objectively makes more money than me, you're making more money than me, right? But everyone in my area is poor. There may be less animosity than your area because you're slightly less poor than me, but everyone else in your community is ridiculously rich, or a small proportion are ridiculously rich there. You would agree with that, right? There are unique problems that come with wealth disparity. And I think that the more you see, particularly people that, not because they're trying to live off the government dole, but people that for years and years did backbreaking work that are basically being told tough luck, learn to code, like that there was something was going to come to a head. And historically, this has happened, and it's almost always involves violence. So I think that Trump is commendable, because I don't think you could name one major political candidate that had any serious attempt that they were trying to break the status quo. So I commend Trump for at least making an effort. Whether or not that, you're absolutely right that an effort doesn't mean it'll work. It can make things worse. That may be the case. I think if we're honest, though, both of us would say we don't know how this is going to play out. I ultimately think that as things get poorer, Trump will make adjustments, and we'll end up with trade deals with these countries and the stock market. And we won't get the radical change that maybe Trump is suggesting, but we'll get more favorable things than the status quo has been. That's my prediction of what's going to happen, but it could be wrong. You have people like Peter Schiff that's out there today saying this is it. This is going to be the end of United States hegemony. People are going to sell the dollar. They're going to realize it's unpredictable. Europe's going to start trading with China. That's it. U.S. loses its status as world superpower. All of a sudden, not only are we not going to have cheap goods, people are going to lose faith in the dollar and the United States. That could happen, right? But at least I guess that he tried something. And, that's the place I put on it. I think it's too close, or it's too quick to just look at the stock market or to look at like things of what Europe's saying. And I ultimately think that coming from a position of a more stronger point, and this is classic Trump art of the deal stuff where he makes like a big sell. No, we don't even want non-negotiation. We want you to buy more. We must have a zero deficit. That's what we want. We didn't care about your tariffs, right? I think that in his mind puts you in a stronger negotiating point than when it's like, oh, well, we'll completely eliminate our tariffs and we'll agree to, we'll have a mineral deal with you where we agree to buy minerals from you. And so that'll decrease the trade deficit. I don't think you get there under Kamala Harris. I don't think you get there under Joe Biden. I don't think you get there under Barack Obama. And I think the proof's in the pudding because they didn't attempt anything in a serious nature like that to deal with the trade imbalances and the massive spiraling debt that's out of control, the hollowing out of the middle class of this country. They seemed content to go along with the donor class that was happy that they were all getting wealthy and it was business as usual.
I'm gonna use this as like my final thing.
Sure.
To my usual. And by the way, thanks again. My name is Jolah Talks Politics on YouTube. If anyone wants to call into I do a call-in show every night around 10 p.m. Eastern. I have a phone number. I'm making like a terrible TikTok channel on YouTube. I'm almost at 25K subs. So if anyone wants to chat from Rob's stream, definitely feel free to hop on and argue with me after this. And I would just say like I'm definitely sympathetic to wanting change. If you could take what's that guy's name? Is it Osborne, the independent running? Is it Osborne, the independent running in is that Nebraska or I forget what state that was. Osborne.
I don't know who you're talking about, but
1 second. If Donald Trump, Dan Osborne, okay, he's a former he's a Navy vet, industrial mechanic, and former labor union leader. I'm pretty sure he's running in Nebraska as an independent, and he did really well in a Senate election. If like Donald Trump was Dan Osborne or some other guy who's just like, I don't know, a vet and a mechanic and he's getting into politics to break the status quo, I'd be sympathetic to just like believing that person is like a shakeup. He can really shift the system. But Donald Trump is, an Epstein partier, P. Diddy best friend, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton best friend, donor, who's been intertwined in these circles his entire life. He's a reality TV guy. We don't even know like how much money he's worth or if he really was successful in business. Like, he is not the savior. I would be very sympathetic to like Donald Trump's views and a person that's genuine and really cares about the stuff that Trump claims to care about. So like Dan Osborne, if you guys have a chance to look him up, really interesting case. He really is like what you'd call like a moderate or a centrist or like an actual populist who's from like a real background. And I think Dan Osborne is a good example for how you can get involved in politics in the local level as well. And you don't need to be a progressive or a liberal or a Kamala or Biden or a MAGA or a Trump. You could just come into politics and caring about issues that affects you. So definitely, I'm very sympathetic to your guys' want for a different future, but I think it's only going to come if we elect people like Dan Osborne and politicians who are not as intertwined in these corporate influences. But yeah, thanks for the chat. If you want to ever schedule like a more pointed debate on like an actual topic,
that would be
fun. Both come prepared. Let me know. I usually do call in with people who are just like not on the YouTubes or Twitch or anything, so who are not media trained at all either. So we can get something prepared where we actually come in ready. But yeah, thanks for
yeah. If you have to leave, I'll answer you. But if you have to leave, that's fine. And if you ever want me to call into your show or whatever, I don't.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It could be set up as something that we have time to prepare for or not. I don't care. I'm quite busy, so I oftentimes do very little preparation because I work 90 hours a week and stuff like this. But
I agree. I hop on at 10 p.m. randomly. Yeah.
And so thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. There's another person on, so I'll talk to him, but I am going to answer your position real quick if you don't mind. Yeah, you don't have to stay. That's fine. So, all right, man, take it easy.
All right. I'll be watching. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think that the problem with that is that he sort of contradicts himself in there. So if I'm to believe that Dan.
Watch his stream. See what he says. Dan Osborne. I don't know, dude. Yeah, bro. The art of the deal. I think Trump has the art of the deal. No, don't say good job because that was not good job. Is PP still here? I saw Pondering Politics was here. I'm like, dude, I don't even have my Vyvanse tonight. And Raisin made me do this because I had no callers. I'm like, this is not the good time for Mr. Pondering to be watching. Mr. PP Pants. Now, I don't ever have conversations with people who are very media trained, back to their like talking points so aggressively. And someone talking so long is painful. So it's definitely an adjustment. Yeah, like someone arguing on YouTube who's actually trained to argue on YouTube is like a different battleground. And it's like, okay, we're gonna bring you back into talking about COVID. And it's like we're gonna nail you down on something that's and that's the thing where it's like if you bring me back to a COVID conversation and the concept of speech, and I'm not used to having those rhetorical conversations that's based on just like, I'm gonna hold you to this point, and it makes you look bad. It's designed to make the other person look bad, you know. And you hear the other person at the end. You hear Rob going into like, Donald Trump, just like with the tariffs, he's gonna like do the art of the deal. He's art of the deal and stuff. And it's like, what he says makes zero logical sense at all. But if I answer back and actually have a debate, he's gonna bring it back to COVID-19 and make it a COVID culture war topic. No, and they don't engage on criticisms. That's why like debating is like diminishing returns. Like debating does not give you much returns at all. Because then it becomes who's a better speaker, or who's used to the media environment more, or who can like. Often in debates, the most bad faith person will win. Yeah, devolving conversation by going down random rabbit holes, which is why I told Raislin I was not going to talk to Rob, but I had nothing else to do tonight, and I'm not on Vivance, so I can make bad decisions when I'm not on Vivance. But yet your live says debate me? Yeah, I want regular people who like are not brain poisoned on the internet to call in. It's a totally different thing than talking to actual, like, you know, Andrew Wilson. Well, Andrew Wilson. Yeah. Your brain poisoned. No, there is no seeding of the ground because it's not like a conversation. And if they do agree on something, they came in agreeing with it beforehand. Do you only want to talk to people who agree with you? No, I want to talk to regular people who are not internet debate bros. Because I don't have my like. I have to get more Vivance. I can't afford it. Thank you so much, by the way. I saw this. I forgot about this. Thank you, Casey. Thank you so much for the donation. Very kind. $50 for pushing facts on this opinionated person in quotes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you. Is Rita still here? Wait. I didn't know. Last night. Thank you. Last night I wasn't even streaming. Thank you for $20. RQ, Rita. I usually see you in chat. Thank you. Thank you. I took Vivance before Destiny did. Don't get me started on Destiny, bro. He was saying the dumbest things you can say about progressives. What was his point on COVID? That it's authoritarianism. Read Cam's messages. I saw some of Cam's messages during it. Which ones from Cam? Which of Cam's messages? He took it before either of us. Nice. Destiny said that like it's the whole point that like money in politics is a bad messaging point. That like talking about money in politics is self-defeating because no one cares. And it's like may I please call you? My name's not Jolah Politics, it's Jolah Talks Politics. Oh no, I'm pretty tired. Yeah, I'll take it. Take the generic. I can't afford the generic either, bro. I don't got no money. Baller. Just kidding. I got donations now. How much they pay you? What, USAID? Oh, Australia. He wants actionable demands or expectations. Well, see, there's an issue there. There is a huge difference. If you're going to watch a politician give a public statement or an interview, and you get mad because there's not any actionable things, it's like, you don't understand politics then, you know? You have to understand politics. It's about being directionally correct, like JD Vance said, unironically. You lead people in just like a direction of what you care about. So when Trump said the cats and the dogs are eating whatever and they're violent savages, that was directionally correct for them because it made people not like immigrants. Now, I don't like that political realm, for sure, but It's how politics works. So you're not going to have like 100% mapping onto like, here's my actionable policy. It's just really difficult. Like that Gary economics guy, I really, we're allowed to have dumb grifters too. We're allowed to have propagandists that turn people in the right direction when it comes to just like, taxing rich people is a much bigger problem than expelling immigrants, for example. And I'd rather people be mad at the rich than immigrants because it's a much more pressing issue. And on that way, they can find real policy solutions. They can elect politicians who want to find policy solutions then. You can gin up support on catchy populist lines. Well, one issue that led to Trump was Obama ran on campaign finance. Obama, if you go back and watch it, Obama did run on campaign finance, and he ran against the establishment, but Obama never did the reforms. So it's a very strong political point, but it was never genuine. It was never genuinely a thing they wanted to finish. Oh, Gary economics. He's not like an economic expert like he pretends to be, but he's very good at rhetoric. Watch out for the straw man. I know. Yeah, use catchy lines. If you have like Kamala Harris being so sloppy with like the unrealized gains or whatever, like why roll that out? Like you should have like. It's unbelievable with all these consultants and everything. It's unbelievable they don't have these policies just like ready to go. They should have that ready. It should be simple. You could use ChatGPT even. Like just have something ready to go, bro. Okay, 1 second. Let me decide what I want to do. I'll take a call or two. But yeah, the messaging matters even more because like Donald Trump has not made one clear policy proposal in his entire life, or one clear sentence in his entire life. And you know what? The wealth tax or the unrealized gains tax, I don't even care about running on it because that's never gonna happen. Like that stuff doesn't matter. Like because you just know she wanted to tax the wealthy, and that would have made people happy. Because it's gonna sound better than just like we're gonna increase income tax. I am happy Democrats are going with the attack. I'm really happy they're picking up the attack line that Trump is insider trading and pumping the markets on purpose. I love that attack line. And every Democrat is going through that now. Democracy dollars. Why does everything Andrew Yang talk about have to sound so cringe? 145% tariffs are going to clog the U.S. ports of entry. U.S. importers are expected to abandon goods at ports. Yeah, I saw Chinese importers or shipping companies were like leaving cargo in like Vietnam and other countries to ship it through those countries too. I'm late to your show. Dang. European countries will replace their U.S. weapons with European weapons systems and donate their obsolete F-16s to Ukraine. Well, yeah, China's funding Russia. China's helping Russia. What else did Cam say about? Yeah, the rest of the world is adjusting. That is true. Scott talked about the phone calls too. Slimy propaganda Jew. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna restart my YouTube Shorts one more time. I need like a quick little break. Then I'll take a couple of calls. A federal class action lawsuit has been filed in Pennsylvania against Elon Musk and his Political Action Committee America PAC, and alleging they failed to fully compensate individuals who collected petition signatures. No way, bro. Elon Musk America PAC is getting sued by the people who did it, claiming he is owed over $20,000 for referring registered voters to sign a petition on free speech and gun rights. The lawsuit asserts that America PAC promised $100 per signature and referral, but did not honor these commitments, affecting potentially hundreds of participants. Dude, is Elon Musk going to get sued on the other end of this? Like, not the fact he paid off people to vote, but the fact he did not actually pay them? Bro, that'd be hilarious. Wait a second. Oh, wait. America PAC contends it paid millions to canvassers and reserves the right to withhold payments in cases of suspected fraud. What the hell? Say it back. I love the my lips do look pink on this camera. My lips really do look pink. I gotta change something on it. Okay, I'm gonna redirect you to the horizontal stream. I have 2 streams running at the same time on this channel. I'm gonna redirect you to the horizontal and do another YouTube Shorts and take a couple phone calls. If you want to call into the show, I will take calls in. I'll take calls in 5 minutes. I need a little break though. I'm tired today, but I'll get back on for like an hour. Okay, I'll take a call. No wait, in 5 minutes I'll take calls again and start up a new YouTube Short stream, and then I'll do it for an hour and take some calls. Okay, so wait, go to my other stream. I'll direct you there. That's alright. That's alright.